Hi. Recently, the Australian government has put the issue of marriage equality to a voluntary postal vote through the Australian Bureau of Statistics. This is basically to avoid actually taking a vote, and the outcome will be non-binding because people will only have 14 days to register. You can be assured that many young people who are not registered to vote currently will not be able to vote for this. And in general, voluntary voting favors older people rather than younger people, simply because they don't vote. Now, hopefully in this case, this won't be the outcome, but it could well be. And I just had a few things to say about this whole process. I won't talk about the process itself, but already, right from the outset, this presents the option for people who oppose homosexuality, basically, to advertise and make public statements and try and sway the vote, because really a vote against marriage equality has nothing to do with marriage. It has to do with people's dislike of homosexuality. They believe that the only proper way of having a relationship is between a man and a woman, and at that, one man and one woman. And so this is their opportunity to put out homophobic messages. And there have already been homophobic messages put out by people like the Australian Christian Lobby, Erica Betts, Tony Abbott, and a range of other people. Tony Abbott's used his information about spoken in confidence with his sister, who is a lesbian. He's used that to basically disparage his sister and other gay and lesbian people. Now, you can see this is getting really ugly really quickly. I wanted to speak to a few of the issues that regularly get raised. One of those is this idea that everyone needs a mommy and a daddy. This completely ignores the idea that a lot of people don't have mummies and daddies. I mean, obviously, biologically, you need sperm and ova to have procreation. But there's an awful lot of people who are single parents, some of those because the other parent has died, but many of those because their parents have separated or divorced, or because their parents were never together. It may have been an accidental pregnancy that a woman has decided not to have a termination, and to bring the child up. And so there are many, many people in that category, and I've known and lived with many of them. As a single parent, I've lived with other single parents in shared households because it's extremely difficult economically for single parents. And, you know, people say, another of the messages is, oh my God, if gay marriage is allowed, then if same-sex marriage is allowed, then we will be teaching in school that this is all right, that homosexuality is okay. Okay, let's look at that for a moment. As a a single parent in a household with two other single parents, with three children who grew up basically as siblings. We all went to a local school, and it had fairly small classes. It was an inner city school, but it was a nice one. And as a parent, I went along to the classes periodically to help. Basically, at that school, parents, particularly of younger children, were invited to come along, were encouraged to come along and help run classes. Now, the teachers were in charge of the classes, the parents were just assisting. I can remember one particular class that I want to talk about where this was when the children were young. They were, I think, everybody in the class was under 7, and they were asked to draw a picture of their family. Now, the kind of conventional picture that is encouraged is mommy and daddy and maybe a brother or sister and a dog and a cat or whatever. And the problem at this particular school that the children were having is that almost none of them had that particular configuration. I think there were like 2 children who had their birth mother and their birth father living together in the house. So this presented a problem for children. They asked, well, Mommy and her boyfriend live with us, but my daddy lives somewhere else with his girlfriend. Can I draw all of those people in? And of course we said yes. Mommy lives with her girlfriend. Can I draw them in? Yes, of course. In our case, it was, well, Mommy lives with another mommy and another mommy. And can I draw in the other kids as my family? And this is the problem with real life these days, is that it doesn't fit neatly in the box anymore. There are many, many people who are in heterosexual relationships who are not married. There are many, many people in heterosexual, who have children heterosexually, who are no longer married. There are many children who go from one family to the other family, back and forth. And they may have formed bonds with a step-parent who subsequently divorces, but they still feel close to that, and they may spend time with that step-parent who's now separated and their current partner. And so children may have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adults who they consider part of their families. They may have step siblings. They may have non-related siblings who they consider part of their family. I mean, my daughter considered the other children who were 2 years and 4 years older as older siblings, as older sisters. They all thought, these are our family. These are the people I look up to. These are the people I fight with. These are the people I share my life with. The thing is, pushing this agenda that somehow marriage equality is going to upset the situation of a child having mommy and daddy is absolutely nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense because it's not the case now. Currently, children have all kinds of family configurations. Currently, children already live with same-sex parents. Making that a legal marriage has no impact whatsoever on what children do or what children have in their family. Saying, no, we shouldn't have marriage equality is not going to mean any children suddenly end up with a male and a female parental biological parent living with them. It is not going to change any child who is already living with same-sex partners, and there are many. None of their situations will change. What it will do, and what I think the homophobes are hoping for, is if we can keep teaching children that marriage and sex is a man and a woman, mommy and daddy, who live forever together. What happens is that all of those other children, whether they're heterosexual parents who are divorced or separated, heterosexual children of heterosexuals who have never married, who are single parents from the beginning, gay children of two same-sex partners, children in shared households where there are more than two adults. All of those people will feel, all of those children will feel wrong. What schools saying families come in many different shapes does is say, these children are okay. You're all right. It says to the children, you're okay. You have a family. Yes, this is your family. Yes, your family is all right. Yes, your family isn't weird. It isn't bad. It starts putting a barrier between bullies who would make those people feel bad because their parents are gay or lesbian, and it puts a barrier between those bullies and the children. It says, no, that's not wrong. You can't make fun of people. I mean, kids will anyway, but it says it's not right. It sends the clear message that it's not right to abuse the other children, because that kind of abuse is not justified. And isn't that a message we want to send our children? Isn't it a message that we want to send our children, that it is not all right to abuse other children because of their parents' sexual orientation? And we have to remember that the sexual orientation of parents has nothing to do with the likelihood of a child being the same sexual orientation. Maybe it has something slightly to do with it in the sense that if we say it's okay, then if the child feels that way, they won't have to deal with so much guilt and pain and agony. But that's not saying that that child will be gay or lesbian. It simply says that they won't feel so awful if they happened to be gay and lesbian. Because telling children that being gay and lesbian is wrong or bad has never stopped people from being gay and lesbian. I mean, let's be clear that these things, legally and socially and conventionally, have nothing to do whatsoever with lived reality. The lived reality is that there are same-sex parents. There are now. There are same-sex relationships. There are now. And changing the definition of marriage to allow some relationships to be legally recognized is not going to change the number of people who are in those relationships. Right now, there are many, many people who are living with same-sex partners. If they're living with same-sex partners, all it means is that it can't be legally recognized. It is legal discrimination. It doesn't change the number of people who are actually in these relationships. It doesn't obliterate us, to not recognize us. When you say that I'm not allowed to get married to a partner, it doesn't change the fact that I might have a partner, that I might have a commitment. It's clear that there are people in same-sex relationships who've been in same-sex relationships, in committed relationships for 20, 30, 50 years. Now, that's going really well in terms of any relationship, including heterosexual ones. There's not a lot of heterosexual relationships that can say they've been together for 50 years. And yet there are same-sex relationships that can say that. It doesn't imply anything about fidelity or lack of it. It doesn't imply any ethical anything. It just recognizes a lived reality. The recognition through schools and so on that there are people who are in same-sex relationships, all that does is recognize that some of the children's families are not wrong, that they are just part of the Australian social landscape. And the truth is that they are just part of the Australian social landscape. And we need to remember that, and we need to counter the homophobia that's based on this family thing. In Ireland you saw heaps of, Mummy and Daddy, I want a daddy. Well, I mean, what does that mean? That if you have two daddies, that means you're twice as good? Every child needs a mother. That means if you've got two mothers, it's twice as good. And, it also, we need to be able to address all of these things. That the reality is that there are people who are in same-sex relationships, that right now there is legal discrimination that has implications in a number of ways. Now, many jurisdictions like New South Wales and Tasmania and so on have gone a long way to correcting legally many of these aspects of discrimination. But if marriage exists as a legal concept, as a religious concept, but as a legal concept in a secular society, then it has some impact. Otherwise, why bother? And quite frankly, my personal preference is that marriage as a legal concept should just be obliterated. I think everything should be based on, de facto relationships, because they're real, and that would include everybody, and there would be none of this discrimination about whether, this one has been sanctified by these approved people or whatever. It would mean that, partners, same-sex partners would have the same rights in terms of hospital visitation, in terms of making medical choices for an injured partner, in terms of funeral arrangements, in terms of superannuation, in terms of all of these things, including migration. All of these things, there are still elements of discrimination between marriage and de facto relationships. Now, marriage is not necessarily a religious affair already. People can be married in a courthouse without any religious ceremony at all. There's no particular religion you have to be married. And certainly there are a number of churches that are just fine with same-sex marriage. So it becomes religious discrimination, among other things, to say that because this church here, the Catholic Church or whatever, Cardinal Pell, doesn't agree with homosexuality, that something like the Metropolitan Community Church cannot hold a valid marriage that is legally valid in a secular society. Now, I understand the Buddhists entirely, and I think quite a few of the Unitarians and a number of Anglican parishes and so are in favor of allowing legalization of same-sex marriage. And certainly there's a lot of people who aren't really religious, for all the fact that you can ask people, do you believe in God? And people say yes. There's not a lot of people who are devoutly religious in Australia. There's a lot of people who really never attend church except maybe Easter and Christmas, who maybe acknowledge religion, Christian religion, in those days. More often people who are Buddhist or something like that, or Muslim or some other non-Christian religion, to be religious in a non-normative way, because the norm in Australia is nominal Christianity. To be religious in a non-normative way usually means that you are actually practicing that religion. And so those people tend to be more committed. The people who tend to be less committed tend to be the people in the major religions who are culturally or through heredity, family, are nominally this religion or that religion. Second-generation migrants who are nominally Muslim or Hindu, or a lot of Jewish people, are not observant. They don't normally go to practice any kind of religious ritual or anything like that. They may say, yes, I'm Jewish, yes, I'm Muslim, yes, I'm Hindu. but they don't necessarily go ahead and practice that. They don't go to temple or synagogue or whatever. Some of them do, just like some Christians are devout and observant. A lot of them aren't. So this idea that, marriage should be based in some sense on religion is kind of crazy. And it flies in the face of any kind of recognition of the various religions that are just fine with same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage. So you wonder, where does this prejudice actually come from? It's simply bigotry. It's simply social bigotry in people like Tony Abbott and Erica Betts and people like that. And in a lot of people. But going back to my other point, when the narratives of family as being a heterosexual family who are married for life is invoked, it's a lie. And it's a lie that doesn't help children, it damages children. Because the fact that it is a lie means that all those children who are not in that kind of, illusory narrative of normativity will feel like there's something wrong with their particular family. They'll feel that there is something wrong with their life, with their parents, with their family situation. And it creates an avenue for abuse. Now, the motive for abuse doesn't come necessarily from that creation of the avenue. It comes from the bigotry that's already out there. And a lot of the push and publicity around a no vote on marriage equality is going to be providing a huge homophobic narrative for any child interested in bullying or subject to falling into that kind of bigotry to do so. They'll have all kinds of motive and language and rationales to abuse other children. And we see that happening now. And all of this is just going to make it worse. And really, the people who are opposing marriage equality should be ashamed of themselves. Okay, and I want to say an additional little thing. I read today that, I think it's Mark Makey, the publicity officer, vice president in charge of publicity or what, director, whatever he is with the ABC, has instructed people in the ABC not to make any opinion known on social media around marriage equality. That means if somebody is lesbian, they're not allowed to say anything in favor of marriage equality. Not only that, and he said the more high profile, the more important it is that they say nothing to maintain the, quote, objectivity, end quote, of the ABC. He's also instructed people not to use the term marriage equality, but to use same-sex marriage. And right there, I would say they already step outside of the bounds of objectivity. Because to say marriage equality is not an allowed term is a form of censorship that is unjustified. To insist that you use same-sex marriage is in some way to invoke homophobia. And the issue really isn't. The reason people might use marriage equality is because that's what it is. The fight is for marriage equality. It says that all partnerships should be recognized and that homosexual relationships, that gay and lesbian people, lesbian gay people, should not be treated unequally in terms of the access to legal measures given through the civil institution of marriage. And let's be really clear. If your church isn't going to marry you because you're in a same-sex relationship, it's not going to marry you after marriage is legalized. We're not talking about religious marriage. There are already many churches that will marry you. They just can't legally marry you. We're talking about civil marriage in a legal sense. We're talking about the difference under law in the treatment of marriage and de facto relationships. And there are several differences that still persist. And so it is important in an egalitarian society, in a pluralistic society, that the civil definition of marriage should not include inequality. Because if the civil definition of marriage includes inequality, then it becomes discriminatory. And that's what we need to end, that kind of discriminatory treatment. And that's why marriage equality is about equality. It's not about supporting homosexuality or anything like that. It's about recognizing that there are people who have lifelong commitments, who make commitments in the same way as heterosexual couples who are not able to be legally recognized in respect of a number of laws, like superannuation or recognition in business and this sort of thing. You know, if in workplace relations law, you know, there are measures to support a partner or provide some sort of benefit in that way, this should be done in an equal way, regardless of who your partner is. Yeah? Just because you don't like the person's partner doesn't mean they should be legally treated differently under civil and secular law. And that is the issue. And the ABC should not be taking a side and banning a phrase like marriage equality, particularly if they are trying to impose that on people speaking in social media, not in the ABC itself. But I don't expect to see much equal treatment. I rather expect that anytime a bigot wants to speak, they will be allowed a forum. Anytime somebody arguing for marriage equality wants to speak, you'll have to have fair and balanced and have a bigot there on the other side, because this is what we see in the media. And we know that many of the massively privately owned media, private media, mainstream media, are already predisposed against marriage equality. Anyway, I'll end it there. It was just a short thing in reaction to what I saw today, but I just wanted to share and remind people that what this is about affects real people, that regardless of any propaganda about the desirability of heterosexual marriage, a lot of children don't have a biological mother and biological father living with them. And when you present this as the only model of family, you disadvantage all those children, whether their parents are in heterosexual relationships that are non-marital, or are subsequent relationships, or whatever, whether they are in same-sex relationships, whether they are children whose parents have transitioned and are now a different sex, or now non-binary, or any of the realities that children live with. When you say those things are not part of family, are not part of reality, then you are impacting all of those children. And I would say, certainly in the school that my children went to, those children were the majority of children. Anyway, you're affecting all those children badly because they already live with the parents that they live with. And by parents and family, it may include people who are not related, who are not in a romantic relationship with their primary caregiver, but who may be living with them in the same house and may have done so for years and intend to keep living with them. And it affects all of this. They're all, but family is as children experience it. It's not how it's defined. I mean, my housemates, my partner at the time's daughter, defined family as the three adults and the three children living in that household. She didn't include her biological father, who had never lived with her, and who, at a certain point, because she wanted to meet him, she spent some time with him, and after spending some time and feeling neglected and ignored and not treated well, she decided she wasn't really interested in maintaining any connection. And as far as she's concerned, he is her biological father. She knows him. But he was not included in her notion of family. Instead, I was included, my daughter was included, the other woman who lived with us was included, her daughter was included. Because those were the people she lived with. Those were the people she treated as sisters, that she related to as sisters, that she related to as responsible adults who cooked and cleaned and looked after them. That was family for them. That was family for those children. Anyway, that's all I need to say. If we remember the children, then don't buy into this nonsense in relation to the no marriage equality vote that will come out as publicity, because you're negatively impacting children. The vote is only about legal recognition for couples that already exist. That's what it is. It's about the equal recognition of relationships that are already there. Thank you.